This is Lemmy with Revzilla TV. As you can see, I'm on top of a 2015 Indian Scout. I've been dying to get on one of these since I first heard about them. 100 horsepower jammed into a small chassis sounds like more fun than a sack full of kittens. The question becomes though, can the Indian Scout live up to the formidable reputation of its predecessor? To find out, we're throwing this baby through a full Revzilla shakedown. We're going to show you what's awesome about the Scout, but also what needs to be improved. And because this is a Revzilla style review, we're also going to show you what modifications you're going to need to make if you're thinking about putting a Scout into your garage. Come on, let's go. The 2015 Indian Scout is a new entrant to the mid to heavyweight level cruiser market. It differentiates itself from some existing competitors in two major ways. First, and most notably, it's the other American cruiser. The second way the Scout stands out, it's got a big bike motor tucked into a very compact chassis. It's going to be perfect for riders who do short haul work and they want something that's nimble and agile, an athletic bike that's light on its feet. Now, couple that information up with the fact that the Indian Scout is easily the most affordable item in Indian's lineup, and it's not too hard to see what customer they're gunning for. They're looking for younger riders, returning riders, but riders who have enough experience to understand that there's some cachet in owning a premium brand like an Indian. Remember, Indian is America's oldest motorcycle manufacturer. Now, when it comes to competition, there's no shortage for the Scout. If you're looking at an Indian Scout, odds are that you're very familiar with the Harley-Davidson Sportster 48. The two bikes are very similar. Similar displacement, almost an identical MSRP, and you can see that fat front tire up front gives it a heavy dose of that American cruiser styling. Of course, both bikes are also made in America. Now, if the made in America thing isn't necessarily a hang-up for you, there are some metric cruisers out there that might also be to your liking. I'm thinking specifically of a Suzuki Boulevard, a Yamaha V-Star, or perhaps a Honda Stateline. They're going to offer similar features for, again, right around that same price point. Now, when it came time to evaluate the Scout, we had to figure out who this bike was being made for. Pretty obviously, this is not for the guy who's going 3 states away, and it's not also for the person who's going to work in the morning. The Scout is a rider's bike. This is for someone who doesn't have a destination. They want to get out there and ride just for the sake of riding. Now, having said that, I spent plenty of miles on the Indian Scout, and in my time on the Scout, I really did fall in love with a bunch of stuff about this. There are so many positive qualities that the Scout has. Let's go for a ride, and I want to show you some of them in action. Now, when I got on the Indian Scout, I did the same thing I do with every bike that I don't own. Treated it like it wasn't mine. I got on this thing and I started romping on it, and man, the engine is a peach. This motor has got so much power, over 4,500 RPMs. You can just get right on it, and this thing gets right up to speed. It really is a quick bike. Now, the engine's also got some duality about it too. This thing's almost sleepy and docile under 4,500 RPMs. It won't get you into trouble unless that's what you want. Keep in mind, this is a very modern engine design. This thing's actually over square. It's got more bore than stroke. Couple it up with its 4-valve heads, and you know that this is a bike that's going to rev to the moon. It really does perform. It's pretty funny how fast you can get right up to speed on this puppy. It really does move. Now, this thing's not all brawn. There's some beauty with this too. Check out some of the treatments they've given the engine. This thing looks absolutely beautiful. You can see all these cast-in ribs into the jugs. I also like some of the surface treatments. You're gonna notice recut areas here on some of the fins. And then they also have chrome over some of the rough cast areas, as well as some polished chrome areas too. This is a very handsome engine. It looks very stately. Now, one of the other things that's cool about the engine is it's also part of one of my other favorite parts of this bike. It's part of the chassis. If you look underneath here, you'll notice that there's absolutely no frame rail underneath the engine. That's because the engine is a stressed member. Not only is it propelling the bike, but it's also helping to stiffen up the chassis. Now, it's pretty evident that the Indian designers who were working on the front end were also talking to the frame guys. Check out this wide tire on here. That's going to be part and parcel with a bike like the Indian Scout. Something that's harkening back to that American cruiser. It's going to give that classic look. Needs a tire that's kind of wide. So to work around the fact that a wide tire sometimes doesn't handle that well, the Indian designers did a great job. They really steepened up the rake angle relative to a regular cruiser. This has got a 29-degree rake angle. Typically, you're going to see bikes in this market in the 30 to 32 range. So by quickening up that steering a little bit, they maintain that stable feel that a wide tire can give you without getting that slushy feel on a turn-in. I'm coming into a turn right now, and this feels absolutely fantastic. I know exactly what my front tire is doing because of the feedback I'm getting from it. Now, the last thing on the Scout that I absolutely loved were the brakes. The brakes are fantastic on this bike. When I first got this, I thought there was absolutely no way that a single disc applied to a 100 horsepower motorcycle could feel good, but that's not true at all. I can slow way down, or I can get right back up to speed very quickly. The brakes are really good. They do a great job hauling the bike down from down to a stop, but they also provide excellent feel, both at the lever and at the pedal. Part of the reason they feel so good are things like this stainless line. You've got one on the front and also hooked up to the rear brake. I hope Indian doesn't change a single thing with the brakes on this motorcycle. Now, I could talk all day about things that were positive about the Scout, but in living with it day to day, there were some flaws that started to expose themselves. Now, as you've just seen, the Scout absolutely rips. This thing has loads of power. And fortunately, thanks to the awesome brakes that the Scout engineers fitted this thing with, it stops every bit as well as it goes. Couple that up with the awesome chassis and design integration, and you've got a bike that handles well on the highway without feeling twitchy, but is also super nimble around town. Now, even though the architecture of the Scout is absolutely fantastic, as I piled miles onto this bike, some problems became immediately evident to me. Let's get back to that engine. Sure, there's lots and lots of power, but it all seems to come on after 4,500 RPMs. The Scout really makes you work to get the power that it has to offer. One of the other crucial items I feel like the Scout really failed on was the suspension, specifically the front. Oh my gosh, was it soft. Couple that up with the rear suspension that was a little bit firmer than I expected, and you have a very confusing ride. The suspension pieces don't work well with each other, nor do they work well with the Scout considering how capable the motorcycle is. There were also a handful of other problems that I noticed when I was riding the bike. Things like the low oil pressure indicator. It's neither a light nor a gauge. It was hard to figure that out. Couple that up with some other small stuff like things that were moving around the bike, the mirrors, the turn signals, items I was constantly readjusting, and you've got a couple of flaws that really do make riding the Scout a little bit more of a chore than it needs to be. Now I'm gonna have an easier time showing you this stuff rather than telling you about it, so strap on that gear and let's go for another ride. Now, when I first got the Indian Scout, I had to learn how to ride this bike. It's not like your traditional cruiser. This thing doesn't have gobs and gobs of low-end torque. If you're a habitual engine lugger, the Scout leaves a lot to be desired. If you're in the wrong gear, cranking down doesn't produce any torque. You can see it right now, just there. I was at full throttle because I was in the wrong gear. This thing just has no low end. It's got lots of power, but you have to be willing to get it out of there. So if you're a serial engine lugger, the Scout might not have a drivetrain that you love. One of the other things it's a little weak on too is engine braking. There's not much engine braking here. It just doesn't slow down in a big hurry when you roll off the throttle. That's something to be aware of. There were many times I found myself downshifting furiously in order to get some engine braking, and too many times I was in first. I couldn't get any more engine braking out of this. So just keep in mind, this is a different style engine. This is a modern engine in this cruiser. Now, one of the other things about the engine that seems kind of minor but was also very important for me was the low oil pressure indicator. The Scout has neither a light nor a gauge. Here, let me show you at this stop sign exactly what we're looking at. If I kill this engine and cut the oil pressure like would happen in some sort of a bad scenario, all you get is this readout here on my LCD screen. That's the only indication I have that I've lost engine oil pressure. That can be problematic, especially if you're on the highway and you need to get pulled over. Time can be critical. It's a minor flaw, but it's a flaw nonetheless. Now, having said that, there were other little flaws I found with the Scout. Nothing crazy, but there were just some little things. For instance, these turn signals. Look at these. They move around like crazy. Every time I was out on the highway, I noticed myself having to readjust them because the air pressure had blown them back.
I found myself a couple of times using my foot to adjust things, kind of like this, even out on the freeway. Seems kind of crazy. You shouldn't have to do that. I understand they're trying to save people, you know, who possibly are going to have a low-speed tip over or maybe a garage bump from having to buy new turn signals, but this isn't the way to do it, I don't think. Now, keeping in fashion with things that were moving around are these mirrors. Now the mirrors are great, they're placed perfectly, I had great vision of what was going on behind me, but because they use these cheap ball and socket joints, I was constantly readjusting. Vibration at 80 miles an hour meant that anytime I needed to make a lane change, I was first readjusting my mirrors. No good. For me though, the biggest shortcoming on the Indian Scout was the front suspension. The suspension is so soft. Now the rear of this bike was actually kind of firm. It's good for a bigger guy like me. However, I even had some smaller folks ride the Scout for me to make sure that I wasn't incorrect when I said the front suspension was just too soft. Watch my suspension action working here as I run over just normal things you'd see on typical bad pavement. Unfortunately, this thing is working overtime. I'm hitting the top out springs on this. There's not that much travel and the springs are so soft. Damping is bad. It's not confidence inspiring, especially for a younger rider or somebody without boatloads of experience. They don't want to feel their front tire not giving them feedback from the road. This thing is completely undersprung. I don't really like it. This is something that the Scout should have been addressed. This suspension is flat out unacceptable. Fortunately, all of these things are easily fixable. The Scout's a great bike as long as we get a couple things repaired.
Now I've tried to do a good job showing you some of the areas where the Scout faltered. Some of these problems happily are fixable, but some of them are part and parcel with the Scout. Now at RevZilla, we're doers, not complainers. If the Scout was to follow me home and find a place in my garage, some things would have to change. I'd start up here at the front suspension. As I mentioned, it's just too soft. Happily, Icon suspension makes some stiffer fork springs you can slide in there. Couple that up with a little bit thicker fork fluid, and you're gonna get a front end that's much more responsive than the numb feeling you're getting from the stock setup. Now, if I was a little bit lighter rider, I'd probably also move to the rear of the bike. Nothing to buy here, but I think you could modify the stock suspension just by adjusting out all that preload. You're gonna have a fairly stiff rear end coupled with a newly stiff front end, and I think it's gonna play well with the Scout's sporting nature. From there, I think I'd stay at the rear end of the bike and also slip a set of mufflers on there. We threw a set of Trasks on our Scout and it sounded absolutely nasty. There's two reasons I would do this. A, I'm a sucker for loud bikes, and B, every time I was at a stoplight and a Sportster owner rolled up, I'd want him to know not to tangle with me. The Scout is a badass bike. All that guy's gonna do is waste gas looking at my taillights. From there, I'd move back up to the front of the bike. Get rid of these mirrors. Look at them, they're still moving all over the place. This is a quick and easy modification. There's about 1 billion mirrors out there that'll look great and fit well on the Scout. One of the other things I think I'd also change are these front turn signals. Again, nothing to buy here. A little DIY modification should get you home. I think you can add either a little bit of grip tape to the fork tube or possibly shim these things out a little bit to keep them from moving around so easily when you're on the highway. Now I had lots of other thoughts about the Scout. This bike really killed it for me, but a lot of the things I thought about it hit the cutting room floor. Shoot over to Commentary where you can read my in-depth analysis of the Indian Scout. From there, if you like what you see, subscribe to us on YouTube. While you're doing that, I'm heading out for a couple more test miles on the Scout. As always, I'm Lemmy, I'm out of here.